On an early autumn evening, Elena stood at the kitchen counter watching steam curl upward from a pot of tomato basil soup. The house smelled warm and inviting, the kind of comfort she had once associated with love. She glanced at the clock again. 7:42 p.m. Daniel had texted nearly an hour earlier, running late. Don't wait up. She stirred the soup anyway. There had been a time when Daniel Whitmore rushed home to her, loosening his tie the moment he stepped through the door, pulling her into spontaneous embraces that made ordinary evenings feel electric. Back then, they had eaten dinner sitting cross-legged on the living room floor because their furniture had not yet arrived, laughing at how adulthood still felt like a costume they were trying on. Now the furniture was expensive, the house immaculate, and their conversations carefully reduced to logistics. When the front door finally opened at 8:26, Daniel entered with the distracted energy of someone whose body had arrived, but whose mind remained elsewhere. His phone was pressed between his shoulder and ear as he murmured about projections and deadlines. Elena offered a small smile he did not notice. He ended the call, placed his briefcase down, and kissed her cheek. A gesture so quick it felt procedural. "Long day," he said. "You've had a lot of those lately," she replied gently. Daniel exhaled, already loosening his cuffs. "It'll slow down after this quarter." She nodded, though she had heard some version of that promise for nearly 2 years. They sat at the dining table, but halfway through the meal Daniel's phone vibrated again. He apologized with a raised finger and checked the screen. Elena watched her reflection shimmer faintly in his untouched water glass. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Just work." Work had become the third presence in their marriage. Uninvited, constant, and impossible to compete with. Later that night, Elena lay awake while Daniel slept beside her, his breathing deep and even. She studied the faint crease between his brows, wondering when she had stopped telling him about the small details of her day. Not because she wanted to keep secrets, but because she had grown tired of speaking into exhaustion. She turned toward the ceiling. Was this what stable love looked like? Quiet, dependable, and slightly lonely? The following week brought their 7th wedding anniversary. Elena did not expect grandeur. She only hoped Daniel might come home early so they could share a simple evening together. At tea 6 p.m., she lit 2 candles anyway. At tea 7:15, her phone chimed. Emergency meeting. "I'm so sorry. Rain check this weekend?" Elena stared at the message until the screen dimmed. She told herself not to be dramatic. Daniel was not careless. He was committed. He worked hard because he believed security was the purest expression of devotion. Still, as she blew out the candles, a thin thread of disappointment tightened quietly inside her chest. 2 days later, her best friend Lila Grant insisted on dragging her out of the house. "You need air," Lila declared, "and preferably sunlight." They walked through downtown, where a community revitalization project had transformed an aging block into something hopeful. Murals brightened brick walls, and volunteers moved with purposeful energy. Elena paused near the entrance of a partially restored cultural center, studying the architectural sketches displayed on an easel. "Beautiful, isn't it?" She turned to the unfamiliar voice. The man standing beside her carried an easy composure, his charcoal sleeves rolled neatly to his forearms. There was nothing overly polished about him, just a quiet attentiveness that felt increasingly rare. "I was just thinking that," Elena said. "I'm Adrian Cole," he added, offering a handshake that was warm without lingering. "Lead architect on the project." Instead of launching into technical jargon, Adrian asked what she liked about the design. The question caught her off guard. People rarely asked what she thought about anything beyond dinner preferences. "The windows," she said after a moment. "They make the space feel open, like it's inviting people to stay." Adrian smiled slightly. "That's exactly the intention." Their conversation drifted effortlessly from architecture to travel dreams neither had yet fulfilled. Adrian listened with a steadiness that made her feel, for the first time in months, that her words were not background noise. When Lila returned with coffee, she studied Adrian with polite curiosity before glancing knowingly at Elena. As they prepared to leave, Adrian said, "We're always looking for community volunteers once the interior phase begins. You seem to have a good eye." The comment lingered with her longer than she expected. That evening, Elena mentioned the project to Daniel while he scanned emails on his tablet. "Sounds nice," he murmured. "You should do it if you have the time." She waited for him to ask another question. Any question, but none came. Over the next week, Elena found herself returning to the cultural center under the practical excuse of volunteering. Yet what drew her back was harder to articulate. Adrian greeted everyone with equal respect, whether donor or day laborer, and he had an unusual habit of remembering details people assumed were forgettable. "You said you prefer natural light," he remarked one afternoon, adjusting a curtain rod. "Tell me if this feels too harsh in the mornings." The fact that he remembered startled her more than it should have. Their conversations remained comfortably appropriate, yet Elena noticed a subtle shift within herself, a lightness she had not realized she missed. She laughed more easily there. Time moved differently. One rainy evening, a sudden downpour forced volunteers to linger inside until the storm softened. Thunder rolled low across the sky, and the building hummed with the gentle percussion of rain against new glass. Elena wrapped her cardigan tighter around her shoulders. "Cold?" Adrian asked. "A little." He adjusted the thermostat without comment. Such small attentions should have been ordinary, yet they felt extraordinary precisely because they were so simple. Driving home later, Elena was struck by an unsettling awareness. She could not remember the last time she had felt so distinctly noticed. The house was dark when she arrived. Daniel had left for an overnight business trip. A note on the counter wished her a good week. She traced the indentation his pen had left on the paper. Standing alone in the quiet kitchen, Elena realized it was not anger she felt, nor even resentment. It was absence. She moved through the room, switching on lights, but brightness did little to soften the hollow atmosphere. Their home was beautiful, carefully curated, and strangely untouched by warmth. She prepared for bed. Her phone buzzed with a new message from an unknown number. "Adrian here." Lila shared the volunteer contact list. "Just wanted to say your perspective today helped us avoid a design mistake." "Thank you." Elena hesitated before replying. "Happy to help. It's a wonderful project." Three dots appeared, vanished, then returned. "Not everyone sees what you see." She set the phone down, unsettled by how deeply the simple sentence resonated. Climbing into bed, Elena stared into the darkness, acutely aware that nothing outward in her life had changed. She was still a devoted wife, still living inside the structure of a marriage built on years of shared history. And yet, somewhere beneath routine and responsibility, a quiet realization had begun to take shape, one she could neither fully name nor easily dismiss. For the first time, Elena Whitmore allowed herself to wonder what it might feel like to be truly seen, and why that feeling seemed to be arriving from someone who was not her husband. The message from Adrian lingered in Elena Whitmore's thoughts far longer than she cared to admit. It was not flirtatious, nor improper, yet it awakened something subtle, a sense of being recognized not as someone's wife or someone's responsibility, but simply as herself. She told herself it was harmless. Volunteering at the cultural center soon folded into her weekly rhythm. What began as an occasional visit gradually became the part of her schedule she protected most carefully. There was something restorative about the unfinished space, the scent of fresh paint, the echo of footsteps across polished floors, the promise of transformation. Adrian Cole seemed to move through it all with steady intention. He was neither overly familiar nor distant, offering conversation that felt natural rather than pursued. One afternoon, as they reviewed fabric samples for the reading lounge, Adrian studied her selections thoughtfully. "You tend to choose textures that make people want to stay," he observed. Elena tilted her head. "Is that unusual?" "It's intentional," he replied. "Most people design for appearance. You design for feeling." The comment warmed her unexpectedly. Take a tea home. Practicality governed everything. Daniel valued efficiency, furniture that lasted, schedules that optimized time, decisions that reduced risk. Once, she had admired that certainty. Now she wondered when practicality had quietly replaced tenderness. That evening, Daniel called to say he would miss dinner again. "Client flew in early," he explained. I'll make it up to you this weekend. You've said that before. Elena answered before she could soften the words. There was a brief pause. I know. Just hang in there with me a little longer, okay? She agreed, though she was no longer sure what they were waiting for. Later, unable to shake a restlessness she could not name, Elena called Lila Grant. You sound far away, Lila said immediately. I'm fine, Elena insisted. Fine is usually code for something else. Elena hesitated, then admitted, there's someone at the center. Adrian. He's kind, attentive. It's just easy to talk to him. Lila was quiet for a moment. Easy can be dangerous when you're lonely. I'm not lonely. Then why does your voice soften when you say his name? The question unsettled her. I would never cross a line, Elena said firmly. I know, Lila replied gently. But lines rarely announce themselves when they begin to blur. The conversation lingered with her long after they hung up. Days later, a scheduling mishap left Elena and Adrian alone in the building longer than expected. Twilight filtered through the tall windows, casting the room in muted gold. Adrian set down a stack of blueprints. You've been quiet today. Just thinking. About. She surprised herself by answering honestly. How strange it is that spaces can feel more welcoming than the places we call home. He did not respond immediately, as though weighing whether to step closer to a truth she had only half spoken. Sometimes people stop noticing each other, he said at last. Not from lack of love, but from the assumption that the other will always be there. His words felt less like observation and more like understanding. Elena looked down at her hands. Is it selfish to want to be noticed? No, Adrian said quietly. It's human. Silence settled between them. Not awkward, but charged with recognition. When she finally gathered her things to leave, the rain had begun again, heavier this time. Adrian offered her his umbrella, but a sudden gust turned it useless within seconds. They ran toward the parking lot, laughing breathlessly as water soaked through their sleeves. Under the shallow cover of the entrance awning, Elena shivered. Without thinking, Adrian stepped closer and wrapped his arms around her in a brief, steady embrace meant only to warm her. Yet the moment it happened, time seemed to pause. There was nothing improper in the gesture. No urgency, no hesitation, just quiet comfort. Still, Elena felt something inside her shift, a small but undeniable awareness. She pulled back first. Thank you, she said, hoping her voice sounded steadier than she felt. Adrian simply nodded, as if sensing the significance without naming it. Driving home, Elena replayed the hug again and again. It had been innocent, she reasoned. Anyone would have done the same. Oh, why did it feel as though a boundary had been brushed? At home, Daniel sat at the dining table surrounded by documents. Relief flickered across his face when she entered. I didn't expect you back so soon, she said. Flight got canceled, he explained. Figured I'd work from here. She noticed the faint exhaustion beneath his eyes and felt a familiar tug of compassion. Daniel was not unkind. He was simply elsewhere too often. How was your day? She asked. Productive, he replied. We're close to landing a major account. He smiled, clearly proud. She waited for him to ask about her day. He didn't. As she prepared for bed later, Elena caught her reflection and studied herself with unusual scrutiny. When had she begun measuring her words before bringing them home? When had sharing started to feel optional rather than instinctive? Her phone vibrated softly on the nightstand. Made it home dry? Adrian had written. She stared at the message, aware that answering meant acknowledging a connection she had not yet defined. Yes. Thank you again, she typed, that a reply came moments later. You deserve someone who makes sure you're taken care of, Elena. Her chest tightened, not with excitement, but with the unsettling comfort of the sentiment. Across the room, Daniel slept already, one arm flung across the pillow where she would soon lie. She watched him for a long moment, remembering the man who once drove 3 hours through a snowstorm just to spend a single evening with her when they were dating. People did not transform overnight. Neither did marriages fracture in a single dramatic instant. More often, they drifted quietly, almost politely, until distance felt normal. Elena set her phone face down. She told herself that what she felt was gratitude for kindness, nothing more. Yet beneath that reassurance stirred a fragile secret. She had begun to anticipate Adrian's presence, to look for him in rooms before realizing she was searching. The next morning, Daniel rushed out early, pausing only long enough to kiss her forehead. "Don't wait up tonight," he said. Another late one. After he left, the house fell into its usual hush. Elena stood by the window watching daylight gather across the street, aware of a truth she could no longer comfortably ignore. Her life was full, stable, and strangely untouched by the feeling that someone was walking beside her. Later that afternoon, while organizing donated books at the center, Adrian approached with a small, appreciative smile. "I'm glad you came today," he said. The simplicity of the statement lingered with her. For reasons she could not entirely explain, Elena realized she was glad too. And though she would not yet admit it aloud, something unspoken had already begun to grow. Quiet as snowfall, soft enough to excuse, yet steady enough that she sensed it might soon ask more of her than she was prepared to give. By early winter, Elena Whitmore had grown accustomed to the quiet anticipation that accompanied her visits to the cultural center. She never named the feeling directly, yet it revealed itself in small habits. Choosing her coat more carefully, arriving a few minutes earlier than necessary, noticing immediately whether Adrian Cole was already there. Nothing between them had crossed into obvious impropriety, yet the space separating friendship from something more had become increasingly delicate. Home. The distance between Elena and Daniel Whitmore continued widening in ways neither openly addressed. Their conversations remained polite, efficient, and strangely weightless, like letters exchanged between acquaintances rather than vows shared by partners. One Thursday evening, Elena attempted once more to bridge the gap. "Could we have dinner together tomorrow?" she asked as Daniel typed rapidly on his laptop. "No phones. No interruptions." Daniel did not look up right away. "Tomorrow might be tough. I'm presenting to the board." "You're always presenting to someone," she said quietly. That he paused then, sensing the strain in her voice. "This is temporary, Elena. I'm building something for us." She studied him, wondering when us had begun to sound so theoretical. "I don't need more things," she replied. "I need more of you." The words hung in the air longer than either expected. Daniel closed his laptop with a measured sigh. "Why does it suddenly feel like whatever I do isn't enough?" "It's not sudden," she said gently. "It's been growing for a while." He rubbed his temple, exhaustion sharpening his tone. "I can't be in two places at once." "I'm not asking for two places," Elena answered. "Just one, with me." The conversation ended not in resolution, but in silence. Heavy, unresolved, and quietly painful. That night, Elena lay awake again, though this time her thoughts refused to settle. She did not want to become someone who kept emotional score, yet she could not ignore the steady ache of being postponed. The next afternoon, a freezing rain fell across the city, turning sidewalks slick and reflective. Elena arrived at the cultural center, soaked at the hem despite her umbrella. Adrian noticed immediately. "You look like you fought the weather and lost," he said lightly, handing her a clean towel from a supply shelf. She laughed faintly. "The weather is winning today." He studied her expression more closely. "Something else is too." The observation loosened the restraint she had been maintaining for months. "Do you ever feel," she began slowly, "that you can be physically present in someone's life and still feel absent?" Adrian did not rush to fill the quiet that followed. His patience invited honesty rather than performance. "All the time," he admitted, "absence isn't always about distance. Sometimes it's about being unseen." The word echoed inside her. Before she realized it, Elena was telling him about the anniversary dinner that never happened, the conversations shortened by deadlines, the growing sense that she had become part of a schedule rather than someone Daniel chose each day. She spoke carefully, never cruelly. Even in frustration, she protected Daniel's dignity. When she finished, Adrian said softly, "You shouldn't have to shrink your needs to keep the peace." Emotion pressed unexpectedly behind her ribs. She blinked it back, embarrassed by the sudden vulnerability. "I made vows," she said, almost as if reminding herself. "And vows matter," Adrian replied. but so does your happiness. The simplicity of his concern unraveled something she had been holding tightly. Tears slipped free before she could stop them. Without hesitation, but with unmistakable gentleness, Adrian stepped closer and drew her into an embrace. This time the hug was not about rain or cold. It was steady, protective, and unhurried. For a moment, Elena allowed herself to rest there, surrounded by the unfamiliar relief of being held without expectation. The world beyond the half-finished walls seemed to fade, leaving only the quiet rhythm of shared breath. Then awareness returned all at once. She pulled back, startled by how natural it had felt to remain. "I'm sorry," she said quickly, brushing at her cheeks. "I shouldn't. You don't have to apologize for being human," Adrian said. Yet the air between them had changed. Neither named it, but both recognized the fragile threshold they were nearing. That evening, Elena drove home through blurred headlights, her thoughts restless. She replayed the embrace again and again, not searching for romance, but trying to understand why comfort had felt so dangerously close to belonging. When she entered the house, she found Daniel already there, pacing with his phone pressed to his ear. "Delay the contract if you have to," he was saying. "I'm not losing this opportunity." He ended the call and offered her a tired smile. "Good news. If this goes through, it could mean a promotion." "That's wonderful," she replied sincerely, and she meant it. Yet as he spoke enthusiastically about travel requirements and expanded responsibilities, Elena felt an odd dissonance, as though his future was accelerating while their shared life remained paused. "Will it mean even longer hours?" she asked carefully. "Only for a while," Daniel said. "It'll secure everything." Everything except time, she thought but did not say. Later, while Daniel slept, her phone illuminated the dark. "Are you all right?" Adrian's message read. "You seemed overwhelmed today." She stared at the words, aware that answering invited intimacy she had not consciously permitted. After a long hesitation, she typed, "Just tired." "Thank you for listening." His response came minutes later. "You deserve someone who shows up when your heart is heavy." The sentence unsettled her more than it comforted. Across the bed, Daniel shifted slightly, his hand brushing hers in unconscious habit. The contact was familiar, yet it no longer quieted her thoughts the way it once had. Elena realized then that betrayal was rarely a single, catastrophic act. More often, it began in these silent comparisons, in noticing who listened, who lingered, who made space. Over the following days, she tried to re-anchor herself in her marriage. She suggested a movie night, cooked Daniel's favorite meals, asked about his work with renewed interest. He appreciated the gestures, but remained tethered to his obligations. One evening, after canceling yet another plan, he said gently, "Once this quarter ends, I promise things will change." Elena managed a small smile, though hope was becoming harder to sustain. The storm finally broke a week later. Daniel forgot to attend a small gallery event featuring a piece Elena had helped curate for the cultural center, something she had mentioned repeatedly. She stood alone beneath warm lights, scanning each arrival until it became undeniable he was not coming. When she returned home, disappointment sharpened into words she could no longer contain. "I needed you there," she said. "I told you something urgent came up." "Something always comes up." Daniel's patience thinned. "I'm doing this for our future." "And what about our present?" she asked, her voice trembling. The question lingered unanswered. Overcome and unwilling to let the argument deepen into cruelty, Elena grabbed her coat and left before he could respond. She drove without direction until instinct guided her to the one place that had begun to feel unexpectedly steady. The cultural center was nearly empty, lights dimmed except for Adrian's office. He looked up, surprised. "Elena? What happened?" The concern in his voice dissolved the composure she had been clinging to. "I don't know how to keep asking someone to choose me," she confessed. Adrian stepped closer, his expression filled not with triumph, but with quiet sorrow. "You shouldn't have to ask," he said. Emotions surged again, and she leaned into him almost without realizing she had moved. His arms closed around her, stronger this time, anchoring rather than merely comforting. Elena knew, even within the safety of that embrace, that something irreversible was unfolding. Not a dramatic fall, but a slow surrender to the place where she felt most understood. For the first time, she did not pull away immediately, and in that suspended moment, Elena sensed with startling clarity that the most dangerous boundaries are not the ones we crash through, but the ones we cross so gently we barely feel them give way. Winter settled heavily over the city, and with it came a quiet clarity Elena Whitmore could no longer postpone. The embrace she had shared with Adrian Cole days earlier lingered in her memory, not as a fleeting mistake, but as a mirror reflecting truths she had tried not to examine. She did not return to the cultural center for nearly a week. Instead, Elena moved deliberately through her days, studying the life she and Daniel Whitmore had built. Their home remained orderly, their routines predictable, their partnership functional. Yet beneath that stability lay something fragile, a connection sustained more by history than by presence. One evening, she found Daniel asleep on the couch, his laptop still open, spreadsheets glowing faintly in the dark. A blanket had slipped halfway to the floor. Elena draped it back over him, her fingers lingering briefly on his shoulder. He stirred awake. "Elena, what time is it?" "Late," she said softly. "You should come to bed." Daniel blinked, disoriented, then noticed her expression. "Have I been that absent?" The question carried no defensiveness, only fatigue. She sat on the edge of the coffee table. "When was the last time we talked without multitasking?" He closed the laptop slowly, as if acknowledging a truth long deferred. "I thought I was doing the right thing. Working harder now, so we'd have less to worry about later." "I never asked for less to worry about," Elena replied. "I asked for more of you." Daniel leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Why didn't you tell me it had gotten this bad?" "I tried," she said gently. But after a while, repeating the same need starts to feel like begging. The word struck him. For the first time in months, silence between them felt attentive rather than avoided. "I don't want a life where you feel alone beside me," Daniel said quietly. Emotion tightened her throat. She believed him. Daniel had never intended to neglect her. He had simply mistaken provision for intimacy. Yet intention did not erase impact. "There's something else," Elena added, her voice barely above a whisper. To Daniel's gaze sharpened. Not suspicious, but alert. She hesitated, aware that truth, once spoken, could not be recalled. "I met someone while volunteering," she said. "An architect. Adrian." Daniel went very still. "You don't have to look afraid," she continued quickly. "Nothing happened the way you might imagine. But something shifted in me, and pretending otherwise would be another kind of betrayal." He absorbed her words slowly, pain flickering across his face before he mastered it. "Did you fall in love with him?" "No," Elena answered honestly. "But I felt seen, and I realized how long I'd been missing that feeling here." Daniel exhaled, the sound uneven. "I always thought what we had was strong enough to survive a busy season." "So did I," she said. They sat together in the dim room. Two people confronting not a single mistake, but years of gradual drifting. After a long pause, Daniel asked, "Do you want to leave?" The question startled her, not because it was unreasonable, but because she had never allowed herself to consider it fully. "No," she said at last. "But I don't want to stay the way we've been living either." He nodded slowly, as though recognizing that love could not thrive unattended. The following morning, Elena returned to the cultural center, knowing unfinished conversations required courage. Adrian looked up as she approached, relief crossing his features before restraint replaced it. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming back," he said. "I almost didn't." They stood near the tall windows where pale sunlight spilled across the floor. "Elena," he began carefully, "about the other night." She lifted a hand, stopping him gently. "It mattered. That's why I needed distance." Understanding settled between them without resistance. "I spoke to Daniel," she continued. "He knows I've been struggling, that I leaned on someone else for emotional support." Adrian studied her, respect evident in his silence. "I won't become a person who builds closeness in the shadows," she said. "Not with him. Not with you. Whatever is missing in my marriage has to be faced there first." A faint sadness touched Adrian's expression, but it carried no resentment. "He's fortunate you're fighting for it," he said. "I'm fighting for the truth," she replied, "even if it's uncomfortable." For a moment, neither spoke. Then Adrian offered a small, sincere smile. "You helped design a place meant to bring people back to what matters. Seems fitting you'd do the same with your own life." Gratitude warmed her chest. What existed between them had been real, not a grand romance, but a quiet awakening. Yet some connections arrive not to be kept, but to illuminate what has been overlooked. As Elena turned to leave, Adrian said gently, "I hope he learns to see you the way you deserve." "So do I," she answered. The tea home that evening, Daniel surprised her by closing his briefcase before she could even set down her bag. "I took tomorrow off," he said. "No calls, no meetings." She searched his face, wary of promises, but found only steady resolve. "What brought that on?" "You did," he replied. "I realize success means very little if the person I want to share it with feels miles away." They spent the next day walking through a nearby park, conversation tentative at first, then gradually more open. They spoke of early memories, the cramped apartment they once adored, the spontaneous road trip that ended with them lost and laughing, the certainty that had once made choosing each other effortless. "I don't want us to become strangers with shared property," Daniel admitted. "Then let's not," Elena said. "Repair would not be instant. Trust, once strained, required patience." Yet beneath the winter air stirred something fragile and promising, the willingness to begin again with clearer eyes. Weeks later, as the cultural center prepared for its grand opening, Elena stood among the gathered crowd beside Daniel. Warm light spilled through the very window she had admired months earlier. Daniel slipped his hand into hers, not absently, but with intention. "Thank you for not giving up on us," he murmured. She squeezed his fingers. "Thank you for finally meeting me halfway." Across the room, Adrian caught her eye and offered a quiet nod before turning back to his guests. There was no lingering tension, only mutual understanding. Elena realized then that love was less about never drifting and more about having the courage to return. She leaned lightly against Daniel's shoulder. She understood that the most dangerous silences are the ones we accept as permanent, and the most powerful words are often the ones we finally choose to speak. Outside, snow began to fall in slow, deliberate spirals, covering old footprints and leaving the world looking unexpectedly new. And for the first time in a long while, Elena felt certain that whatever came next would not be shaped by absence, but by the deliberate choice to truly see and be seen.